Okay, in the last part, I was showing you the basics of how to make local adjustments with masks. So you can just apply an adjustment layer to one part of the image that you want, not to have to do the whole thing. And we've been using the brush tool to do that. So let's go back. This is where we left off. This is my image that I was working with, and there it is, and we added a curves adjustment layer, and we brightened up the shadow, and we also brightened up the hillside just a little bit, but not nearly as much as the shadow. But we blended this, and we made this nice in between gray a matte mask area that was partially applied a mask, and then the upper part is fully applied. And so I want to show you a couple more things just from a workflow perspective. So let's say this is step one of this image. What's the next thing I could do to make this image better? Okay, so maybe I want to like make the sky, and maybe I want to make the mountains in here just a little bit better, more defined, we could say. So I'm just going to go ahead and make another curves layer, or maybe, mm, yeah, I really love curves. I can do so much with it. Um, but we could use brightness or contrast too. Yeah, maybe we'll do a brightness or contrast just for. I'm gonna delete that by selecting it and deleting it. So let's make a brightness contrast. I don't normally use brightness contrast. It's not nearly as much control as curves or levels, but let's say what I'm really interested in is kind of darkening this mountain range back here. So I want to kind of add to this. I'm like by doing some contrast, try to make it kind of stand out a little bit more. And I'm not so much interested in the foreground and the sky right now. I'm really just laser focused on that. You can see by just changing contrast and brightness, I've um, I've made that mountain range just a little bit more visual and apparent. Okay, and so I, I could do more, but we'll keep it there and say, okay, that's a good start. And so um, yeah, so here's my image. Now my brightness contrast is being applied everywhere. I really don't want that. So I'm going to show you a little thing that I like to do. And it's kind of like working with masks backwards. So I'm like, okay, good. I'm really just interested in that mountain range line there. I could paint all of this off with black, um, or I could add a whole black to this background. Okay, the easy way I like to do that is I have my mask thumbnail selected, I come up to edit, and I go to something called fill. And when I fill, I'm like filling the mask with a color. So I'm going to fill it with black. Okay, this content's black, everything. That's all I got to do. Now, all I've done is I basically masked out this effect completely. So now if I turn a layer off, on, it's doing the same thing. Now what I want to do is I want to come in here and I just want to paint with the brush. I got the brush, and I'm gonna change it over to white. And I'm probably just, yeah, I'm gonna keep it at around 30% opacity. And I'm gonna go in, get real, well, maybe not this close, but I can see that mountain. And I'm gonna make my brush way smaller. Use the bracket keys next to the P key. The bracket keys, one is makes it smaller, one makes it bigger. I'm going to use this. I'm going to probably use a hardness of around 50%. So it's a little fuzzy, but not all the way. And then I'm just going to start painting this on. And I'm not going to worry too much about the foreground. Um, I know that's going to darken this line up here, but I just want to make this kind of just want to stay below the mountain ranges here. And you can turn on your mask if you want. So you can, like this, click on red, so I can just really pay attention to where I've been. Um, and I'm just going to keep going like this. And if there's any places where you feel like you went too far, you can always go back and turn them off. But I don't have to get this entirely perfect. I just have to be close, okay? Because I'm not gonna make such a crazy experience that. Now, if I went over, like here, you can see a little bit that I underdid it. I can flip back to my black, and I can always paint that area back down a little bit if I need to. Okay, so if you, and boy, you can spend all day doing this, so you just want to do what you need to and not overdo it, right? So you can see some areas I have a little like extra part here, and that's where I've had some overlaps where I clicked, let go, clicked again, and I did another 30% on top of the original 30% reduction. Okay, so now let's go ahead and let's step back for a minute and let's look at this and let's see how this looks. Okay, I'm going to turn the effect off. So there, as you can see how I've darkened, that's off, and this is on. I've darkened down that. It just makes it a little bit more visible. Okay, there's a lot of subtle things here that I'm working on. So if I wanted to make that even further, I could just go back in there and I could paint it again, but I'm kind of happy with that. Okay, and so I've made a second adjustment layer and I've made a second mask. Okay, so you can see I'm kind of adding things together, making my image better and better. Let's work on the sky next. Let's see what we could do. Um, let's make another curves layer. I mean, one thing we could do, which is also not a bad idea, is we could try, I think, making, they're going to make a curves layer like this, and let's go ahead and let's play with the mat with the sky. Let's use this little hand tool again. What I'd like to do is I'll make these like highlights in the clouds a little bit brighter, bring those up, but this area down here, this darker part, I'd make it a little bit darker. Ooh, and so that's much more moody. Also made it a much more blue. I'll show you a trick to kind of downplay that. One of the things you'll notice when you use curves and you increase the contrast of something, one of the side effects of that is that you also get color intensification. Basically, you increase the saturation at the same time. This looks pretty naturalistic, but sometimes it feels overdone. So, okay, so I made this curves layer. Boy, you can see why I don't want it to be applying to everything, even though in some ways that makes it look like beautiful golden light. It's really intense. Just want this happening up here in the sky, right? So what I'm going to do now is so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back in here. I'm happy with this actually, and then but now what I need to do is need to define this just to the sky, and there's some different ways I can do that. But I thought what I'd try to do is add use the gradient tool. So I've got my mask clicked here. There's the gradient tool over here on the left. You can see the gradient tool. It kind of goes from black to white here. So wherever I start will be black, which means it will not be affected. And wherever I stop will, I think, be white. Sometimes I get this wrong, but we can always click the reverse key. So I'm gonna click, drag, and let go. And it looks like I did. Yeah, it actually looks like I did the right thing. So you can see now my mask, if you look at it, I made a gradient. I started here, I went up to here. So it started in black and then it slowly fades up to white, right? It's like a fade. And so I increased the sky. And so if I turn this layer off, this is how it was before. If I turn it on, you get like this. Now you're like, okay, good. And if you're like, hey, I like this, I'd like a little bit more, please. Well, we can just double click on the curves and we can make it a little bit more intense by making the curve a little bit more intense. Okay. So you're like, okay, yeah, I kind of like that. Or, maybe that's too much. I don't know. You can kind of play around with your curve and see what happens, see what you get, see what you like. Now, I actually do kind of like how this is a little moody and dark, but I kind of feel like it's oversaturated. And so one thing I can do with curves, now that I have this curves layer selected down here, it's going to affect all this, is I can go, notice here, I have this thing that says normal, okay? And it's also, notice there's an opacity to this layer. So I can change the total overall effect or power of it by just adjusting opacity. So if I liked it, but I wanted to tone it down, well, I could just reduce the opacity. So let's look at that. All right, so click on this and I get a little slider so I can move it back. And so you can see that's what it looks like at 50% opacity. Okay, that's when it's totally off. That's 50% opacity. And then if I go back up to 100% opacity, that's that. Another thing I can do is I can change that normal, and that's the mode, the layer mode, and that has to do with how that layer interacts with the layers below it and above it. If I change that from normal, in this case, all the way at the bottom, there's stuff that affects the way color comes through. If I change it from normal to luminosity, it means that the effects of this adjustment layer won't affect, it will affect only brightness and darkness or luminosity. It won't affect color. So I click on luminosity and it's limited to that. So now, in effect, it kind of doesn't seem as potent, but you can still see it actually did a lot. But instead of being very vibrant, it reduces that out. Okay. Now I could attack that a different way. I could make it another adjustment layer and desaturate the sky, and that would really be the same thing. But this is just a little extra trick that we could use to do it right there in that one layer by changing that over to luminosity. So yeah, so let's go back. Let's turn all these layers off. This is where we started. Okay. Then we added the first curves layer to increase the brightness down here and a little bit in the little bit on the hillside, but didn't affect the sky. Then we went back in when we darkened the mountain range up here a bit, and now finally we've added some darkness to the sky. Okay, so you can see it's like maybe this is a little bit, one thing that we might notice here is that this hillside is kind of darkened up here. Maybe that's too much for us. We'd like to brighten that up. It's totally possible to do that. You can just come into this area and you can just make that even a little bit darker. So you can paint your mask on with the black, and we need to change over to the brush tool, make it a little bit bigger, but I could actually I'm lightening it right now. Sometimes I always get confused, so I'm going to switch this back to white. But oh no, I'm wrong. I had it right at the beginning. Okay, so I'm actually just increasing the intensity of of the mask right there a little bit. And let's see what that looks like. So now you can see it's like it's not as dark up there. You can really play around with this stuff. You could even come back in and more modify this area here if you wanted to make it a little bit darker, right? Like I could all add this right back in, and that's on top of my gradient mask, right? So doing that. So I may not want to do that. I may want to keep this more like a nice gradient. Totally up to me how I'd like to accomplish that. Remember, I'm toggling on and off these the mask the way it looks by holding down the option key and clicking on the thumbnail, and then clicking again to take it away. Or if you like that red transparent overlay, I'm using the backslash key, right? So I can see the mask, and that's going to change depending on which mask I'm looking at. But I don't think you have to turn it off. Go to the next layer. You can turn that one on. You can see that's the one where I was doing the final line. So that's the idea. You can keep working with this, keep building up the image exactly how you want it. So I hope that's helpful. Really, really powerful stuff. And it's really what the heart and soul of Photoshop is about, in my opinion. So thanks for listening.